Hello, everyone, and welcome to the webinar, The Future of Agile Research, Using AI-Enabled Tools for Consumer-Centric Innovation. My name is Jason Partridge. I'm the VP of Client Experience here at Lux Research, and I'm going to be moderating today's session. Presenting today is my colleague, Cheryl Auger. She's the Senior Director of Research, Predictive Anthropology here at Lux Research. Now, throughout the webinar, please feel free to type any questions you have into the question box that you see there on your screen, and time permitting, we're going to answer all the questions that we can today. But don't worry, if your question does not get answered, please don't hesitate to email us at questions@luxresearchinc.com, and we will be sure to respond. But it's a really exciting presentation and a really exciting topic that I'm really excited to jump into. So with no further ado, Cheryl, I'll hand things over to you, and we'll jump into the presentation.
Great. Thank you so much, Jason. This is also a topic I'm incredibly excited to discuss, and that is the future of agile research and how we're using AI-enabled tools to ensure we're doing truly consumer-centric innovation. So I'm going to start by talking a little bit about what agile research is not, right? And agile research doesn't and it shouldn't work like a GPS. And let me break this down for you. And why am I using this example here? But when we think about how a GPS works, we punch in our destination, we're looking for that quickest, potentially easiest route to our final destination based on variables like speed limit, distance, and maybe if it's available, traffic conditions, or if there's construction. But agile research doesn't work like that. And let me explain why. First off, when we use a GPS, we know our exact final destination. It works by telling us the quickest, easiest route to that final destination. Whereas a truly agile approach to research, our destination isn't always known at the outset. It may even change or evolve as we develop new findings and new insights. We may need to evolve our approach in order to take on that agile research. Now, I also want to mention, even if we're doing iterative research where we build on the findings that we've uncovered previously, iterative does not necessarily equal agile. And this is because we often still have a set course. We know what we're going to look at in the first step. We know what we're going to look at in the second step and the third step, and so on. And so it's almost like, continuing with my GPS example, it's almost like we run our search in our GPS and then we rerun the search kind of halfway through the directions in order to find a better search. But we still have that final destination in mind, right? So part of the reason why I gave this example and part of the problem here is that if we think about agile research, it's not predictable in a linear sense, but a lot of the traditional research that we do, even iterative research, is based on this notion of linear predictability or a really linear approach. And of course, a linear approach where we have part A, we move to destination B, which moves us to C and D in that straight and progressive line, there's a certain appeal to it. It may feel more manageable because, in fact, there is that final destination in mind. There's some inherent predictability as well as some structure. But there's a few challenges here, one of which is it doesn't allow the flexibility that we need for agility. Second, consumers are complex. This type of research can miss the full picture and overlook some of the complexity involved in human insight. And finally, I want to note that a linear approach often encourages us to connect the dots as we're doing the research. That is, as we're working through those research questions, we want to understand how A connects to B, how does B connect to C, how does C connect to D. But the challenge there is we're connecting the dots based on a partial picture. We're not looking at the full picture in order to connect the dots, which may mean we actually need to look at those patterns after we've taken on many iterative approaches or many iterations of the work that we're focused on. So what I'm noting here is that agile research is also about revelation and evolution, right? We need to evolve as we gain new insights. We need to identify new questions in order to help continuously build upon and get to those new insights, right? But the problem, and as I mentioned, is there's this kind of impulse towards a linear approach because it does feel more manageable. And as such, many times we default to that linearity. And instead, a truly agile approach doesn't have that straight line and all of those connected dots. Instead, it's more like this visual I have here, where we have dots in different patterns and we need to move in multiple directions and pivot and change. And of course, this can feel daunting. It can feel really hard to make quick decisions and quick choices in the face of, a nonlinear approach. It's almost like we have too many tabs open in our browser, and this is a classic problem I have. And one of those tabs is playing music, but you just can't figure out which tab it is, right? There's this cognitive challenge that we face in doing truly agile research. And the fact is, the more accustomed we are to doing traditional styles of research, the harder agility can be because we need to train a new habit. We need to develop that muscle memory. And this is why in many instances, corporations and many of us sometimes fall back on traditional research and traditional approaches to research that is about moving from A to B to C to D in that linear fashion. But what I want to note today is that many of our most successful clients working for some of the biggest brands, most successful brands out there are working with us to develop and incorporate a more agile approach to their research to overcome some of the problems I've mentioned and to ensure that they're really being consumer-centric. Okay, so how do we do this? What's the solution? Well, I'm going to suggest that anthropology is part of the solution here. Anthropology is like Sherlock Holmes. It really helps us to uncover and to look at things in a slightly different way, and it allows us to make sense of the things that others may miss, right? And how does anthropology help us to get to this bigger picture? Well, it doesn't just follow the trail. It also anticipates where new paths might form. And the way that we do this is we look at the broader contextual context and contextual adjacencies. Let me illustrate this, right? So without contextual meaning, without looking at that broader context, we're seeing just a small part of the picture of what's relevant to consumers. And as such, we're just getting part of the narrative. And often it's inaccurate without that bigger picture. Let me give you an example to bring this to life. If we look at gut health and we just look at those immediate and direct mentions that consumers have, we're not looking at that broader context, we see things like weight loss, immune function, food, brain access. But taking an anthropological approach allows us to see that fuller, richer, bigger picture, and it helps us to uncover the consumer breadcrumbs that lead to new paths, new questions, and evolve our thinking as we gather new insights. So if we go back to my example of gut health, we look at that connection and that broader cultural context when it comes to the brain access. We can see that mood is relevant, and connected to mood are concerns about things like anxiety and the desire to feel happier. So we go beyond looking at mere mentions to understanding the broader meaning, and it gives us this opportunity, and it starts to create a map for us in terms of how to follow the consumer breadcrumbs to ensure that we're engaging in agile research, right? So to reiterate, anthropology helps to take out guesswork. It keeps us centered on the human truth. It helps to ensure that we're really putting those consumers and people at the forefront. Now, when we combine anthropology with AI, we have an incredibly powerful approach, right? Together, AI and anthropology allow us to map the cultural terrain and identify multiple potential destinations. Each of these potential destinations represents a new opportunity for us, right? So what we're seeing here is that AI can help us to uncover those consumer breadcrumbs quite quickly. Now, of course, what's important to note here, and what's distinct from that linear approach that I mentioned off the top, is that linearity doesn't allow for that multiplicity. It doesn't allow us to see all of the opportunities at hand here. And instead, what I'm suggesting is that AI is important to navigate this complexity quite quickly. It also helps to highlight that connecting the dots throughout the iterative process is not truly agile, because what it highlights here, and what I'm going to continue to show you through some tangible examples, is that there are many ways that we could connect the dots. And if we're not recognizing the multiplicity, we're missing opportunities, right? So there's not just one way forward. There's not just one opportunity. And this is where, of course, it's important to think, what are the opportunities that are most meaningful and relevant for my brand and corporation? But nonetheless, the important thing here is through an agile approach, we see that there are many opportunities and many ways to map those opportunities, right? So it's less like just connecting the dots where we follow 1 to 2 to 3 to 4. And instead, this approach allows us to draw constellations, possible solutions that we identify using consumer input. Okay, so now that I've talked a little bit about an agile process and what it involves, how we can leverage AI and anthropology to help us manage some of the complexity of a truly agile approach, I want to give you a really grounded example in some of the research that we've been doing. So I'm going to share with you some findings on clean beauty. And I'm going to start with a traditional approach, right? If we take a traditional approach, we may do some iterative research. We start out, we see that clean beauty is very strongly associated with natural ingredients, which leads us to concerns about safety, then to regulation, transparency, ethics, sustainability, and so on. Well, off the top, it seems like we're getting to a good place where we understand some of the concerns and expectations consumers have, but we have a limited view of the culture from that consumer perspective. And when I use AI anthropology to chart and follow consumer breadcrumbs, I can see that there's something deeper, something more meaningful going on for consumers, right? We see there's concerns about conscious consumption more broadly. Interestingly, there's also concerns about cultural belonging, enduring beauty, broader considerations around holistic health and wellness, as well as personal expression. So we absolutely still see there are concerns about sustainability linked to conscious consumption or consumerism, but we also get a deeper understanding of what's meaningful for consumers. It helps to highlight that there are some shifts taking place in this culture, and it helps us to see where there might be more opportunities, both in terms of appealing to consumers from an emotional vantage point, but also to understand why are they concerned about things like sustainability? Why are they concerned about things like regulation in this context, right? So this offers us a new discovery process where our map is based on those consumer breadcrumbs. And it helps us to identify, again, some of those newer and slightly different, broader, more holistic, richer understanding of what's meaningful to consumers and why. Okay, so let's take this a step further, and I'm going to share with you some of our findings from our Motive AI tool and our AI assistant tools, right? So this is an example that I very quickly pulled from our Motive AI platform to get a better understanding of what clean beauty means to consumers and what are some of the opportunities in this space. And by looking at the deeper and more symbolic meaning, that underlying symbolism that you can see there, I get a better understanding of what's meaningful for consumers and where those opportunities lie. So for example, when we see consumers are embracing gentle and safe beauty, we see a broader shift towards health and conscious living in the beauty space. So we see some of those broader health trends are appearing when it comes to beauty, but it also means that consumers are looking for transparency in ingredients. And it tells us that that desire for transparency in beauty ingredients is linked to those broader trends in health and wellness. And it suggests there may be more opportunity here than meets the eye at first glance. Similarly, when it comes to high quality, it's not only about efficacy, although that's part of the story here, but it's also seen as an opportunity to show off social standing. So there's something else going on from that consumer vantage point around clean beauty as a symbol of wealth and status that we may have missed through our traditional approaches. Similarly, and one that I thought was really, really interesting and didn't show up in that traditional approach is this desire to find community through a broader culture of clean beauty enthusiasts. And what we're seeing here is for many, clean beauty is seen as an opportunity to bond with others over shared values in regard to sustainability as well as natural ingredients. So again, we can see that when we use anthropology and we use AI to leverage big data and to ensure we're getting our findings quickly, we're also getting a deeper understanding of what's meaningful to consumers by leveraging that broader contextual context or that contextual meaning. We can get a better understanding of why this matters and what are some of the cultural requirements that consumers have when it comes to clean beauty products. Let's take this a step further. Not only that, but using Motive AI, I can determine what's naturally most relevant to the consumer. And as you can see here, it's embracing gentle and safe beauty formulations, right? So we can use AI to help us prioritize, to help us manage the multiple opportunities that we uncover through an agile approach. Excuse me. Now that I have a sense of that bigger picture and what clean beauty means to consumers, why it matters to them, what are some of the opportunity spaces that I may want to explore further, I can leverage our AI assistant to help me tie these insights together really quickly. But not only that, it will help guide further exploration. It can help me to determine which questions I should continue to ask, how my research program should evolve to ensure I understand the multiplicity of opportunities here and to ensure that I have that big picture and I'm doing some big picture thinking. Okay, so a few examples here. I know it's a bit tiny, so I'll say them out to you. One further question for research would be, what are consumer expectations in regards to ingredient and product safety? And the reason we might want to further explore this question is to dig deeper into the specific attributes, the specific concerns that consumers have when it comes to ingredient health and safety. Similarly, we might want to continue with our questions by asking, what is the perception of long-term health and wellness benefits versus the aesthetic results that consumers expect from a beauty product? Now, this line of research will help us to understand consumer priorities further. Finally, we might ask, how do consumers integrate clean beauty products into their wellness routines and their broader lifestyle? So again, connecting some of our findings to some of those bigger trends that we know are meaningful to these consumers to help us identify opportunities for things like cross-promotion and bundling. Okay, so the AI assistant can help us to continue and evolve our research program, but not only that, it can tie the insights together to generate ideas, whether they're product or brand concepts, solutions, campaigns. We can use our AI tool to quickly figure out what might we do with some of our findings. And so I just want to note, I did this in a very a quick fashion. I used the tool really quickly. I pulled these lists of concepts together in roughly about 30 seconds to a minute. And my goal was not to present the ultimate or best concepts, but to show you how we can use both AI and anthropology to take a more agile approach to research. So you can imagine what we could achieve if we spent a bit more time on this. But nonetheless, you can see some of the concepts it came up with absolutely tied together some of the big themes, bigger trends that we know consumers were interested in by following the breadcrumbs that naturally reveal themselves. One example here that I thought was pretty cool is this notion of aesthetic fitness cosmetics, right? Integrating aesthetics with holistic health and cosmetics to help enhance appearance, but also keep skin healthy, even when consumers are doing things like working out or sweating, which sometimes can clog pores. Similarly, we see when it comes to that question of efficacy and natural ingredients, there's a suggestion here for long-lasting natural lip tints that is merging that desire for enduring and lasting beauty with their desire for personal expression and efficacious cosmetics with a long-lasting color that is made from clean ingredients. Again, at this point, we might decide that we need to do a little bit more digging. Maybe we want to explore this idea of a lip tint, and we want to do some more specific study on lips and lip tints and consumer expectations. And so we can continue to keep the agile process going. And again, one of the key benefits of using AI coupled with anthropology is that it allows us to pivot quickly. The AI assistant helps us to overcome some of that challenging cognitive load, that feeling like it's really difficult to do this type of research. So this brings me to my key takeaways. One, I want to make it clear that iterative research is a necessary but not sufficient component of agile research, right? The key thing involved in agile research is that we are open to revelation as well as evolution, right? We can't rely on that linear approach to arrive at that rich human insight that we want to help us understand opportunities, right? We need to find ways to overcome cognitive overload, decision fatigue, and that's where anthropology can help. It can help us to stay focused on human truth by allowing us to follow those breadcrumbs and anticipate and identify where new trails are emerging from a consumer perspective. Anthropology is really important because it helps us to make sense of things that we might otherwise miss. And furthermore, combining AI and anthropology allows us to take a new approach to mapping cultural terrain and identify multiple opportunities and different constellations of opportunities that are meaningful to consumers. Furthermore, it helps us to quickly understand why those areas are meaningful to consumers, and it can tie our insights together to guide that further exploration, to help us generate ideas and really come up with some impactful solutions that help to overcome some of the challenges that consumers are facing. So I'm going to stop there. I know I'm at my time, and there's a number of people who are eager to ask questions. So we'll turn back to Jason.
Oh, no, that's fantastic. Thank you so much, Cheryl. There have been a couple of questions that have come in. And if anybody else has anything that they'd like to add, please don't be afraid to type something into the box. And once again, if we don't get to anything here, don't worry about it. We'll make sure that somebody reaches out and kind of addresses any of the questions, or you can use the email that I used previously. Really, really great engagement here, Cheryl. Some specific questions, as well as some kind of broader applicability questions. One thing that came up is, would you say this approach is really well suited early in the innovation process, or is it applicable at later stages as clients are working their way either through a design thinking process or trying to solve maybe a positioning challenge or a marketing challenge? The people wanted to get a point of view on what you thought about that.
Oh, that's such a great question. I mean, obviously, the earlier in the process we are, the more room there is to pivot and to evolve based on what we're learning from consumers. But we don't have to limit ourselves to the early stages of innovation. There's certainly ways that we can leverage AI and anthropology to help us identify ways to really communicate in a compelling way to figure out what's driving consumers and ensure that we're kind of linked into where consumers are at, where they're headed, why they're interested in things. The language that resonates with consumers is also something that we can use our AI tool to identify. So, the answer to me is both. Yep. At various stages of research. Now, of course, the earlier we are, typically the more agile we can be. As we get further into the process, we may have some set priorities and strategies in mind. But nonetheless, if we're open to new tools, new ideas, I think that this is relevant across the various stages of research.
I think that's so great, Cheryl, and it reminds me of, situations where our clients come to us and say, look, we've done other forms of research and we were disappointed because we didn't get a big aha, or we didn't see something that surprised us. And, in those instances, as we're working through with clients and we're talking to them about the process, and we said, if you've created a very, very rigid set of parameters where you're following a process where you're doing what you've always done before, looking for answers where you've always looked for them before, anticipating answers and going, well, why am I not seeing what I saw before? It's really difficult to get to something surprising. And what I think is really interesting about the approach that you're talking about here is that the analogy of following breadcrumbs means that there is an exploratory approach to what we're talking about here to allow the consumer to show us the pathway. And I think that the other thing is that doesn't mean that there's only one consumer path. Our job is then to find those intersection points where we're identifying what's important to the consumer and what is most relevant to the product, the organization, the initiative that is being played there, because that, I think, is where the magic can happen, where we actually find those intersection points where we allow the consumer to lead, but then we actually choose and prioritize the areas that are most relevant to the organization. And that was a really fancy way of actually getting to the next question that I wanted to ask you, which is, are there ways that when your team is working with somebody that you're able to help prioritize which of those potential pathways are the way to go? Is there some way that we're basically providing a metric or a kind of a prioritization that helps to allow us to follow the breadcrumbs of the consumer, but to actually understand, kind of what is actually happening to make more of an educated choice?
Yeah, I love that question. And I just really, really briefly touched on it in the presentation due to timing constraints. But I did highlight a slide where we prioritize these. We use our system to create a metric where we identify how many people are each of these opportunities relevant to today. How quickly is that engagement growing, and where do we anticipate seeing the most engagement over the shorter term or the longer term? And we work with our clients using this information along with their strategies, their plans, what's the best fit for them, to help them prioritize some of those opportunities. And I think it's such a great point because, as I mentioned, one of the challenges with Agile research is if you have multiple opportunities, how do you know which one is the best fit? So absolutely, we have those metrics and we work with our clients to help them understand if we're trying to appeal, excuse me.
That's perfect. It's actually a really great point, Cheryl. And I mean, the big opportunity is following those breadcrumbs of the consumer, but being able to understand how mature and relevant is something in the present, and how much potential growth is there for these things to move forward in the future. Because I think there's a lot of solutions out there that can tell you what has happened or where something is today. But the beauty of Agile research is that we're following those breadcrumbs with a vision for the future. And if we can basically understand that if we go down this pathway, yes, it may be a better pathway in the present, but if there are other pathways that are more relevant to the business or that pose more white space, and again, I think that goes back to that notion of surprise, right? There's so much desire for competitive advantage. There's so much desire for identifying something first, or identifying something that is undervalued by the kind of the category, but is valued by the consumer. I mean, that is the holy grail that I think that we're looking at in this particular instance. And so the ability to understand not only kind of what the cultural maturity and what the kind of the population that cares about it today is, but being able to find those things that have potential for growth is where, kind of some really exciting kind of pathways can open up for clients. And we've seen that with the clients that we've worked with. So it's really great. There's a lot of questions here in regards to the research assistant and how it works and all kinds of fun stuff. I'm going to cherry pick a couple of questions. If anybody wants further explanation around that, please reach out to us, because we can basically go into definite more detail around that. Cheryl, one of the big questions is that, with some of the insights that you shared today, can you talk a little bit about, where the data is coming from and kind of what's happening on the back end in order to make that possible?
Yeah, these are great questions. So we are collecting data from a representative sample of consumers every single month, month over month. We're ensuring that we're covering off consumers from different social classes and races. And we are also looking at a very large number of consumers every month to ensure that we're not just focused on something that's only relevant to a handful of small but maybe loud consumers. Instead, we are looking at those natural conversations that consumers are having regardless of observation. And as I mentioned, we're not only looking at the direct mentions, we're also looking at the broader context. And the broader context helps us to identify the adjacencies, the associations that help us to identify those new trails that we both mentioned. And so our system is using data from consumers to help us follow those consumer breadcrumbs. And then I also talked a little bit about using the AI assistant. And one thing I want to make really clear about the AI assistant is it has absolutely been designed to color within the lines. It is only allowed to use the data that we've provided, the findings that we've provided, to make those suggestions when it comes to follow-up or additional questions, to make suggestions about what to do with the data, from concepts to marketing campaigns. And the other kind of cool thing about the research assistant is it will tell you if you're asking something that it cannot answer based on the previous questions that you've answered. So we're quite confident that we're only focused on the data that it has, and it's making suggestions based on that data. Great questions.
No, really, really, really great question. Really, the kind of the genesis of this methodology came from applying structural anthropology to online data sets. The approach to structural anthropology is, social science-based theory that's been around for almost 100 years, really perfected back in the 70s. But I think that the big aha was our team figuring out how to apply that to long-form conversations online, where we're actually able to kind of map changes in meaning by studying the natural language that consumers are using. And to Cheryl's point, the implementation now with the AI tool is I like to think of it as, a telescope that has a series of lenses that allow it to be accurate, because those lenses come from following the data that is being generated and created by consumers. And we point the telescope based on the topic that we want to look at, i.e. clean beauty. Again, lots of great opportunity for conversation, but we're running up on time here. If I didn't get to your question, I apologize. As I mentioned, we will definitely have somebody reach out to further answer the remaining questions that are there. I do want to say thank you so much, Cheryl. That is going to conclude our webinar for today, and the slide presentation recording from this webinar is going to be sent out to all of the attendees. After leaving the webinar, if you don't mind, you are going to be prompted to complete a short survey on the presentation, and we really appreciate any feedback you may have, because it helps us inform and improve kind of the webinars that we do in the future. And then lastly, please take a moment to check out some of the up and coming webinars that are coming down the pipe. But with that, Cheryl, once again, amazing presentation. Thank you so much for walking everyone through that today. And to everybody that took the time to join us, thank you for joining, and I hope that you have a wonderful day.